I think we had a very interesting discussion about how you communicate with people who have interest-only mortgages. And I think people who have them, they have to take some responsibility for it. They have to find a way out, and the earlier you do that, the better. But I'm not convinced that just a letter from a bank is going to do that. Either you've got to frighten people into thinking, goodness me, 20 years from now I could be homeless, or you've got to find some solution they can move to and make them believe that other people are doing that. So they do take action in time. And I thought all those ideas were very interesting from today's discussion.
Being a bit of the people's champion, are you quite glad that the FCA has actually done what they did?
I don't think they've done enough. I think they let the banks off the hook. There was no look at mis-selling, and they found that 1 in 8 people with interest-only mortgage didn't think they had to pay off the capital. Now, we all might think, well, they must be pretty silly, but that's what the research found. And half of those who had a plan, it actually wasn't an adequate plan. So I think they did find big problems, and yet they didn't take that extra step and say, hang on a minute, should these people have been sold this product? Should banks have sold them an interest-only mortgage, full capital to be repaid in 25 years, without some clear, written, documented evidence that they were going to be able to do that? And you hear of all sorts of vague things, oh, I'll earn a bit more and pay it off bit by bit, or, my Aunt Flora's due to die in the next 10 years and I'll use that. All sorts of things, and no one, of course, looks at the downside. I might get divorced and really find difficult, I might lose my job. So I think without that clear, documented way of paying off the mortgage, there is a risk that some of these were missold.
And knowing that journalists like yourself are going to be hot on the heels of these banks and building societies, do you think that these organisations, these mortgage lenders, are going to change their behaviour from these rather frightening letters to doing something more proactive?
Well, I hope so, because, my ideal scenario would be there was never a 70-year-old couple evicted from their home because they had an interest-only mortgage. Yes, it would make a story we would run, and the bank would be deeply embarrassed, but I hope it doesn't happen. So looking to the future, I hope these things work, but the banks know, and I think this is a journalist's job, that if they don't treat people properly, we will hear about it and they will be exposed as being rather heartless, faceless financial bureaucrats, and they don't want that. So do something now to avoid those bad stories is what I'd say.
Communication, in order to be effective, it has to be personalized. It has to be, offering people some information that's personal to them. It has to be very simple. It can't be a list of possible courses of action, but it really should be one course of action. And that course of action should be something that they can do and which they believe will have an effect, have a positive effect. If you give people a list of things, such as, even one example is engage with your lender, I think people will not want to do that. They're not going to want to engage with their lender. They won't know what that means. That's opening up. It's staring into the abyss. But if you tell them, put £50 extra per month on your mortgage, that's something they might find quite possible to do and easy to do, and it will be a good start. And moreover, something like that specific action is one that will get people started in a habit. Will induce the habit of paying a bit extra, and then they'll say, well, maybe I can put 100 this month, maybe I can put 200 this month, and so forth. So there are certain kinds of messages that I think are going to be more effective than the kind of broad general messages that are being used. And those messages have to really be offering people an action that they can take to help themselves out.
The reality is that a letter is something that is so easily ignored, and to actually give people the opportunity to make a real difference and starting to pay off that mortgage much earlier, so that they aren't faced with the situation of trying to deal with it at the 11th hour when they're suddenly in a situation of facing potential repossession. It has to be a good thing, and I think including things like radio, people picking up the phone and actually talking people through the challenge will be so much more effective than just sending them a letter with a range of very impersonal options.
What about equity release? Is that going to be the magic bullet?
It's not a magic bullet. Certainly for a lot of people, it offers an opportunity. If you actually get to the point at which you need to repay that mortgage and the value of your property has increased such that the LTV is sort of between 20 and 50%, then there are options out there as far as equity release is concerned. And for some people, that really is going to be the answer, or certainly one of the options that they can consider. But it's certainly not the option for everybody. And I think the really important thing on this debate is to get people doing something earlier down the line, so they've actually got a chance to get to retirement without having the mortgage. Then they can use their equity release for something far more exciting than just keeping the roof over their head.
I thought it was a really interesting debate, and particularly useful to hear that Lloyds Banking Group have got some very sensible proposals due in the not too distant future to help some of their clients. And because they are not only the biggest mortgage lender, but also have the highest proportion of interest-only customers, when they introduce a new scheme, it will undoubtedly encourage other major lenders to look at doing something similar. So I think that's really positive.
And what about brokers like yourself? Do you feel you have a big role?
I think there's no doubt that brokers have a big role, because virtually all of broker business is on an advised basis, and clearly we have a responsibility to make sure that clients have a credible repayment strategy if they have an interest-only mortgage. Where there is an issue is that what we consider a credible repayment strategy is often not on the list of credible strategies by lenders. So that's where the advice we would give may well contravene what advice the lender may give if somebody goes direct. And one reason why I think people should actually get advice from their broker rather than the lender.